Welcome back. For this deep dive, we're jumping straight into something pretty significant. How power and belief have really transformed in Western societies. We're looking at the period between 2000 and 2025.
That's right. We've got excerpts from a white paper here, and it sketches out a pretty surprising picture of structural change.
Exactly. And our mission today is really to cut through some of the, let's say, idealized notions of how the West works. We want to get into the functional realities, the actual mechanics, based on this analysis.
And comparing it with other parts of the world, that really throws the Western model into sharp relief, doesn't it? Helps understand what makes it tick, or maybe what's hidden.
Definitely. And here's something to chew on right away, a key idea we'll explore. This notion that elected political leaders, maybe they're becoming more symbolic.
Like figureheads, while the real influence is shifting.
Precisely. So if you're trying to get the big picture fast, avoid the information overload. This should give you a shortcut to understanding a really fundamental shift. Okay, let's unpack this. The source kicks off comparing two hierarchies for the West.
It does. First up is the preached Western hierarchy. This is the ideal version, the one you might hear about in civics class.
Right, the textbook version.
Yeah, it goes, belief first are values, democracy, rights, that sort of thing. That belief then shapes power, so government action, laws. And from that, money follows, generated in a regulated market. Belief, power, money, simple.
Simple, linear, and maybe a bit too neat. Because then the analysis flips it, introducing the practiced Western hierarchy.
Yeah.
That sounds different.
It's very different. It's presented not as a line, but as a loop, a self-reinforcing cycle.
Okay, how does that loop work?
It starts with money. Money buys influence, access, shapes media, that's power.
Lobbying, campaign finance, media ownership.
Exactly. That power is then used to curate belief systems, to shape the narrative, the values, in a way that legitimizes the existing setup.
Right.
And crucially, helps generate more money. So it loops. Money, power, belief, back to money.
Wow. So it's less about our noble beliefs driving the system
Yeah,
and more like the system, driven by money, shapes our beliefs to keep itself going. The source uses a loop triangle analogy for this, right?
Yes, visually representing that constant feedback. And then it contrasts this Western practice model with what it calls the rest of the world.
Okay, how does that look different?
That hierarchy is presented as power, money, belief. Power is central, often personalized in leaders or the state apparatus.
Right, you have to know who is in charge.
Yes, and money tends to flow from power connections, patronage, that kind of thing gets you resources. Belief in this model is often rooted in tradition, culture, religion.
And it reinforces the existing power structure.
Generally, yes. It serves more to uphold things than to fundamentally challenge them. The source uses a side-by-side pyramid image here to make the contrast clear.
So a key takeaway is, the West tends to hide power within systems, institutions. It's less obvious, whereas elsewhere, it's often displayed more openly by leaders.
That's a core distinction made, yeah. And in the West, belief is used to justify the institutions, while elsewhere, institutions often exist to defend traditional beliefs.
It really makes you think differently about where to look for power in our own societies, not just the faces on TV.
Absolutely. It pushes you to look at the underlying structures.
Okay, so we have these models. Now, how is belief actually shaped in this Western system, according to the source? It talks about the mechanisms that shape belief.
Right, and this is where the data gets really interesting, showing shifts between 2000 and 2025. Let's run through the numbers.
Go for it.
Okay, so media, traditional media, that is. It was estimated at 40% influence back in 2000. By 2025, that's down to 30%. Still significant culturally, but declining.
Okay, 40 down to 30 for media. What else?
Education dropped from 25% influence to 20%. Law and policy also saw a decline, 20% down to 15%.
So media, education, law policy, all losing some ground. What about corporations?
They've held steady, actually, around 10% influence in both 2000 and 2025. Think employment, advertising, lobbying, a kind of background hum of influence.
Interesting. So some decline, some stability. But there must be something else taking up the slack, right?
Yeah.
Where did that influence go?
Yes, the big story, tech platforms. In 2000, their influence was tiny, estimated at just 5%.
Right, the internet was still relatively young then, socially speaking.
Exactly. But by 2025, that 5% has jumped to 25%.
Wow. From 5 to 25%, that's a massive shift.
It's huge. The source notes this surge really took off after 2010. And the key insight here is a move from teaching like in schools or through established legal norms to curation.
Curation, meaning?
Meaning the algorithms, the interfaces, the platforms themselves are now selecting, prioritizing, and shaping what information, what ideas, what beliefs people encounter. The interface has replaced the lecture hall in a way.
So the feed dictates reality more than the curriculum. The source uses a pie chart analogy for this, showing the slices changing dramatically.
Precisely. It visually underscores how tech platforms have become arguably the dominant vector for shaping belief. Private company algorithms as the new gatekeepers of collective understanding.
That has, well, enormous implications. Less about debate, more about the algorithm's choices.
Yeah, it raises fundamental questions. How are beliefs formed now? It's less about explicit instruction, more about these subtle, often opaque algorithmic processes. What even is truth in that context?
Now, okay, tech platforms are surging, other things are shifting. Does this mean government is just fading away? The source looks at perceived versus actual government power.
Yeah, this is crucial because perceptions have changed drastically. The data shows perceived government power crashing. In 2000, perceived and actual were both put at 90%.
Okay, high trust, high perceived power.
Right. But by 2025, perceived power is down to 40%, a massive drop in public confidence. But the actual power, while also declining, is estimated higher at 50%. So there's a gap opening up. Trust is falling faster than actual influence. A line graph in the source shows these two lines diverging quite clearly.
Okay, so people feel like the government has less power than the analysis suggests it actually retains. How does the source explain that? Why does government still hold on to that underlying power?
It talks about a hybrid system. Government is still involved, maybe less visibly. It partners with platforms sometimes. There's regulatory inertia rules aren't keeping up, and there's a rise in technocratic rule.
Technocratic rule.
Yeah.
Like experts making decisions.
Yeah, experts often unelected within agencies or advising them. But the core point is the government's frameworks, the laws, the financial regulations, the basic legal legitimacy, they still underpin everything. Even the tech platforms operate within that governmental structure.
So the foundations are still government built, even if the activity on top looks different. Like the rule book's still there, even if the players seem new.
That's a good way to put it. The power is less overt, maybe, but it provides the essential rails the system runs on.
This leads us to that really provocative analogy the source uses, comparing modern democracies to late-stage monarchies. That sounds designed to make you sit up.
It definitely does. It
Yeah.
draws direct parallels. Think monarchy era. You have the king or queen, the symbolic leader.
Lots of ceremony, maybe less actual day-to-day control.
Right. The real control often lay with, say, the clergy, the aristocracy. The belief system was religion. And the crisis point, often revolution.
Okay, so map that onto today.
Modern democratic era. The elected politician becomes the symbolic leader, like the monarch.
Okay.
Real control, the argument goes, shifts towards bureaucracies and technocrats.
Right.
The unelected officials, the experts.
And the belief system.
Science, progressivism, expertise, those kinds of ideals. And the crisis point isn't revolution, perhaps, but widespread mistrust, political gridlock, paralysis.
That's quite a comparison. So who are these modern aristocrats or clergy, according to this analysis? Where is the power center now?
The source points to three main groups. First, bureaucracies. The permanent government departments, the civil service, unelected, often non-transparent.
How do they wield power?
Through writing the detailed rules, regulations, through procedure, process, delay, structural inertia. They control how things get done, which often dictates what gets done or doesn't.
Right. The fine print is everything.
Then you have technocrats, the specialists, AI ethicists, economists, data scientists. They often work within or advise these bureaucracies.
Okay. And the third?
Platforms, the tech companies we discussed,
Right.
curating visibility, reality, commerce. But, and this is key, increasingly shaped and constrained by those bureaucratic policies and frameworks.
Gotcha. And the source has that great line about bureaucracies wielding the iron fist in the administrative glove. It's not flashy power, it's embedded power.
Exactly. It's the power to set the parameters, to slow things down, to define the terms of change. They're described as insulated, systemic, aligned, creating this class of perpetual influence.
Like the old clergy or nobles, but ruling through forms and compliance, not bloodlines and land.
That's the analogy, yeah. Power through friction and process.
So, wrapping up the source's argument, it's painting a picture of a really deep shift, isn't it? What's the core takeaway?
The core argument is this drift. A move away from representative governance, where elected officials and public debate drive things, towards a system of curation, where algorithms and unelected administrators have much more influence on belief and outcomes.
From rhetoric to algorithm, essentially.
You could say that. And this idea that democracy risks becoming more like pageantry, a show on the surface, while the real systems operate underneath.
And it loops back to that comparison with the rest of the world. The West hasn't got rid of control, it's just obscured it, made it less visible.
That's the point the source makes. Control is there, but hidden in complexity, data, delegation, and sitting quietly at the center of much of it is the bureaucracy. Unelected, hard to remove, quietly powerful.
So the big message seems to be, stop looking only at the elected officials. We need to investigate these less visible structures, the administrative state, the platforms, because they are profoundly shaping our reality and what we believe.
They're shaping belief, and they aren't necessarily the ones standing for election.
That really is something to think about.
It challenges our standard view of where influence resides.
So for everyone listening, as you process this, think about those implications. If power is shifting towards these less visible, less accountable structures, bureaucracies, algorithms, what does that mean for democracy, for holding power accountable?
Yeah, how do you even engage with these systems as an individual citizen? They seem so remote, so complex.
Exactly. Maybe think about how this framework helps understand current events or even just how you interact with information online. Who's curating your feed and why? It definitely leaves you with some big questions to mull over.